Fantastic. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining this, which is arguably the first pharmacy research webinar, certainly first one we've had in a long while. Just to give you a bit of a background to this, what we're going to talk about today. This is about helping you to understand what we have as a department in terms of research, why things are changing, and what things are looking like going forward. And we're very grateful that Christina Tsippi, and you brought your colleague over, Simi, who's come along, and they're going to talk to us about innovation, and in particular how, what we can do about innovation, how we can start those sort of initial questions and how that progresses. So hopefully that'll be something very inspiring for you. Before then, I will just be giving an update on what's been happening in the background within the pharmacy department. And then at the end of the session, we'll have time for questions, or we'll close a bit early if we need to. So what I wanted to touch on first was some of the drivers for developing a departmental research strategy. So this all comes back to having individual interest in completing research within the department. And then as sort of that, that's been a long-standing thing for the department, but it's been very much based on individuals going out, seeking their work, developing that with support from the department more widely when that's sort of identified. We've had a number of changes, including clarification of the RPS credentialing, which has been a bit more of a recent development, and research was one of the pillars of that. And that's a very important domain that we need to consider across foundation, advanced and consultant practice. And again, we'll hear about some of the national initiatives. In particular, there was a survey done by the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for the UK, which really identified that there was very little sort of pharmacy-based research. So you can see that from an individual's perspective, from a departmental perspective, from a sort of credentialing perspective, and from a national perspective, there's all subtle drivers to get us thinking about how we can improve and increase the quality and volume of research led by pharmacy staff. In order to answer some of these questions, the pharmacy department, so SMT has overseen the structure, which consists of two parts, really. One is called the Pharmacy Research Strategy Group, which essentially is there to provide an overarching strategy and the leadership around that. The chair of that is Nigel, who unfortunately couldn't attend today, but he would have loved to have told you a little bit more about that. And again, within the structure is something called the Pharmacy Research Support Group, which looks a bit more at actively getting on and supporting people into research. So the two work hand in glove. And obviously, we would use the support group to support whatever strategy is being directed. So just to have another think about some of the research capabilities in RPS curricula. And this is the research domain. Claire, you've got your hand up.
We've lost the slides, Paul. I can't see the slides anymore.
So you can see the research capabilities, and there's a lot of text here, so I'm not going to go into it a great detail, but again, just to remind us that there's foundation, advanced core, advanced specialist and consultant level capabilities around research. And that goes from at the bottom where you're seeking to be involved in research activities to at that consultant levels where you're identifying gaps and designing research protocols to generate the new evidence and everything in between. So this is one of the drivers, as I mentioned earlier, and this is the detail on that. And then the other item, as I mentioned, about the sort of national driver. So the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer's Office published its work in February and March 2024. Their main findings around a UK survey for pharmacy professionals' involvement in research was that only a minority of the pharmacy workforce are currently research active. So by that we mean that they're sort of literally actively doing some type of research, whether that's service evaluation or whether that's involved in sort of more advanced roles. It looked for barriers and enablers for those elements as to why people weren't more involved, and protected time and support were the most significant enablers. for promoting research within the pharmacy workforce. And also, one of the things it was looking at was clinical academic careers. So some will be aware around the clinical academic pathway, which is where you sort of begin your life as a clinician and then you develop your research around that. And ideally, the clinical academic pathway would bring that research in from an early age and essentially create clinicians who can also really push forward the research agenda. And I said it looked at barriers as well. So the barriers really aligned with the enablers. So where what people thought would help them to get into research were also what a lack of they felt was preventing them getting into research. So this did have some recommendations, and this fell into 4 sections. One was about research training. So if you can imagine the skills and the knowledge to create good research. One of the recommendations was around mentoring. So, how do we support those pharmacy professionals who are involved or want to get more involved in research? Engagement to raise awareness of the different programs and different opportunities, and then protected time, which I think sort of speaks for itself, being able to actually deliver the research. And again, this strategy had 3 timelines. So they're talking about short term, medium term, and long term. And I think it's important to remember that this was aimed at a national level. So there was no emphasis or responsibility put on an individual acute trust. So the fact that our department has stood up and tried to sort something out is actually really admirable and really good. So they've taken what's the national agenda and wants to see this go forward. You can see the outcomes of this survey was that they were aiming to support the embedding of research at all stages of the pharmacy professional's career, and also to provide a pipeline of pharmacists and pharmacy technicians who will become pharmacy leaders, again, looking at that sort of clinical academic route. And I mentioned the COH pharmacy response to this. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have the Pharmacy Research Strategy Group. So that's really about the development of a research strategy, which is ongoing and is not an easy thing to write. So that will take a little time. But one of the things that we are actively looking at is to identify and prioritize research areas for the department that would be important, so that we can then work with the leads in the different divisional areas to identify the best sort of the bit of research that we want to support initially and to roll that around. And then there's the Pharmacy Research Support Group. And so I've put in here mentoring, training, engagement. That's what we're trying to support. And some specific issues. So we have an email, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, which will allow you to get hold of a member of the Pharmacy Research Support Group for ad hoc advice. But we're also trying to run drop-in sessions for posters and oral presentations to try and help you where you've identified a potential to present your work and get good feedback on that. Got the support of colleagues and your line manager, you can then get some additional support, a bit of mentoring, a bit of support if that's something that you would like. And of course, when we think about it from a research perspective, presenting your findings, even if they're at an early stage or in a small sort of pilot style project, can be really valuable to get feedback to improve and influence your future work. In terms of some membership, you can see here that we've got very broad membership and sort of in that strategic aspect, we go across the multidisciplinary team with experts in research. And you can see from the support group membership, that's very much focused on COH at the moment, but we're trying to involve as many sort of staff groups as we can to make sure that we've got representative of ways we can support the entire department, but also build on the skills of, for example, of our consultant pharmacists who have those that little more experience in terms of the research. And you remember the curricula of the RPS curricula, they should be acting at those higher levels. So the next steps. The medium and long-term strategies are being developed and ongoing. In terms of the short term, there was, that was really about engagement and starting to think about these opportunities rather than hard delivery. I mentioned about identifying priority areas for the research in the department and increasing engagement within and outside of the department. Again, you may have seen some emails flying about identifying opportunities to present your work or to be involved. And then finally, to mentor our pharmacy professionals using the pharmacy research support group to really help people get on board with their research agenda and to help them deliver. Some strategic priorities, which I quite liked that was coming out of the strategy group, is about being research aware, research skilled and research active. And I think that's really nice to keep those in mind. And then one of the things we've been working to create are some departmental research pledges. So with the help of SMT, there's some specific pledges that they've been able to support, which is great. And so what we're trying to do within the department is foster a research positive culture. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on reducing health inequalities and improving sustainability and improving medicine safety. Promoting opportunities for all pharmacy staff to develop research skills and to contribute to research. And to recognise and support research as a pillar of the practice for pharmacy professional career journeys. So all very positive things and really nice to see and really nice to be able to come here and speak about those and give those to you. So thank you for listening. You can see that we've got a little red caveat there about a web page which hasn't gone live yet, which is a bit of a shame, but we've recorded some videos, a video from Sano, a video from Nigel and a video from myself. We'll send the link around the department just to set out a little bit more about those pharmacy strategy and pharmacy support groups and what we're trying to do. And then if you would like to email the pharmacy research support group about anything, there's an email there. And if you want to read the UK survey from the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer's office, then you can see that via the link there. Lovely. As I said, we're going to take questions at the end of the session. So that just allows me to introduce Christina. And she's going to be talking about bridging the gap and moving research into implementation.
Oh, this is blinding.
Oh yeah, if you stand outside.
Perfect. How's everyone? Hope I'm not holding you for your lunch too long. Just a bit more. Don't look forward to that one. So my name is Christina. I'm a pharmacy background as well, and I'm the medicines automation lead for Health Innovation East. And I've got Simi with me. Like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Simi Odemayo. I am an advisor on the core delivery team at Health Innovation E. I have a pharmacy background as well, also a background in health technology.
Perfect. So what we're discussing today, we're thinking of discussing how do we bridge the gap? How do we take that idea, that innovation, that new thing you're going to try into a real world project and real world research essentially? So this is our contact and our agenda. What we're going to discuss today, we're going to go through today together. But before we start, just a little bit like who we are. Why we're here essentially. So we are a group of specialists, technologists, researchers, healthcare professionals working on, we've got extensive experience around research, academia, science, and healthcare specifically. This is just a mixture of like some of us, not all of us, but we're really passionate about helping the different and best innovations in general in the healthcare system to come out live and meet our patients in the end, whether that's a different change from a medicine perspective or whether it's like a new and literal innovation from our point of view, but something that's going to solve a problem and it's going to benefit our patients and our population. We are a network of networks. So we are part of a national network of bases roughly on the map, all the different health innovation networks out there. We are the Health Innovation East, so our focus essentially is East of England, and we're part of the national element that works and supports us to deliver that scaled up piece of work. In this case, we were established from the NHS, by the NHS, for the NHS essentially, to convene all the different partners within the region in the healthcare sector to develop and deliver the innovative solutions in the healthcare and care system. So there are like a lot of different departments we're going to discuss about, from bringing that idea into real world implementation essentially and delivery. This is a bit of like our partners and the different people and organizations we work and support with within East of England specifically. Middle South Essex is missing at the moment. I know I did mention East of England, but the boundaries are a bit blurred. So we're collaborating with UCLP, which is essentially on the bigger map, is the London one. So to cover Mid and South Essex. So what is innovation? What is that new idea? What is that new thing? How do we take that amazing idea you guys have into real world implementation? I'm just going to go with a few myth-busters first, just to make sure that we're kind of like making it a bit more engaged. So, innovation is only for those who are interested in innovation. What do we think? Yes? No? No? Nice. So, having an innovative culture is so vital for the NHS longevity in general, and this is for everyone involved. Not all of us only work in the healthcare sector, but also it's going to benefit our patients in the end. Innovation can happen quickly. It can literally be tomorrow, right? I have a really good idea today and can have that live implemented within the first week, let's say. I love the positivity. Well, that could happen, but it's gradual. It takes time and it's often repeated cycles because you want to potentially start small and a smaller scale, and maybe you want to scale up and adopt. You might want to do a pilot first in a smaller element and then discuss it further down the line. So it could be repeated as well in different cycles. In a smaller scale, in a bigger element, it really depends on what the innovation, what the idea is, and how feasible it is to implement it within the week or within the year or a bit longer sometimes, years. So it could take time. So my project, my idea is very new and very bespoke. What do we think? How does it sound? Yeah? No? Maybe a combination of everything? Could be? Well, all innovation is recombinant. Every single project is a combination of different projects, of different ideas, bringing those things together for what we've seen. From the development of a new item or a new solution, a new digital tech, to literally just changing the pathway, tweaking that slightly. Maybe that's an innovation, that's a new pathway you want to implement within your practice and your left element, essentially. But again, it's a combination of different things that are already existing, trying a different approach in a different way, essentially. My idea or my project or my research is going to work, definitely, with the first time round. Yeah? No? Seeing with a few smiles? No? Seeing with a few waves? Well, it's trial and error. Again and again sometimes, and it's in repeated cycles we mentioned earlier on, essentially. So we might need some time and we might try something that we thought would work and would be beneficial for the patients and everything, but we might just need to tweak something else as we're going live with our project and with our idea and our research. And we will need to do that again and again sometimes. But the benefit here is trying. If we don't try to implement something or try to change it, it's never going to change, right? Innovation at a larger scale, big ones, big project, big ideas, is the best way to go forward. What do we think? No? Seen a few heads. Yes? No. So innovation prefers fragmentation. Starting small, adopting that successfully, and then having the evidence and evaluation to then scale that up on a regional, on an ICB maybe level, on a regional or on a wider national level, is the preferred method in this case, because we can try and in a smaller scale identify elements we might need to change. As we said, it takes time, repeated cycles again and again, that we can tweak and then have a bigger benefit and a bigger impact for our population on the ground. There's no capacity or money for innovation. What do we think about that one? Is there?
In the right setting.
Yeah,
There's definitely money,
correct. Exactly.
but it follows those small successes and tries to scale them up over time.
Exactly. So the reason we would prefer to have like smaller scale instead of like a big project, big ideas, and like try to have the small pilots essentially is essential because adoption comes from those base environments, the ones that we feel that this doesn't work. Whatever we're trying to do at this moment, we just need to tweak and change something to make it a bit more feasible and more realistic and have a better approach to have the successful innovation and make them cost effective as well for our systems, because that's a massive element of what we're being pushed from an NHS point of view and perspective. And some of them could be event free. It could literally be your big idea could just be a tweak on an already existing pathway or something you're already working on, right? But it could free up the capacity. It could have a better flow in your workload, which is that's free to do. But you need that drive to change that. Essentially, you need the buy-in from the stakeholders, from your team, from your higher up, your SMTs, essentially, to kind of like showcase the benefit and what you could gain potentially from that one. Oh. So what do we mean by innovation in general? So innovation is the process, essentially, of taking those ideas into value, into something that's meaningful, essentially. It could be a form of a product, a service, a business model. It could be literally a lot of different things. It's complex, and it does go beyond that creative element and that invention, that idea, to include the more practical, realistic steps that are really necessary to facilitate that adoption in the end, essentially. So the invention, the research, the idea is just the beginning, essentially. The innovation pathway, until we've got that element of adoption and spread in the end and patients benefiting, you've got the prototype, you've got the manufacturing element, if it's product in that case, you've got that service model you're trying to implement and that tweak that we're going to work together with different stakeholders to make sure that it kind of works together, and consider evaluation as well in those steps, just to make sure that whatever you're trying to capture, you've got more than enough data. So when your product and your idea ends at the end, you've got more than enough really good, valuable data to support your project, to support and showcase the value you had for the system and how that bigger piece of scale up and adoption as well. So, research and discovery. The question, how do we put that down to make it a bit more realistic and forward? And I'm going to hand over to Simi on this one to get the research question right for the innovation. How do we do that?
Yeah. So as Christina already mentioned, sort of the beginning of the innovation pathway always starts with research and discovery. So this can be sort of an iteration of quality improvement, just sort of redesigning that system, ensuring that it is working the correct way, making measurable change. So in terms of getting the research question right for innovation, so when you're actually formulating a question, how do you actually go about making sure that the research is something that's impactful and is able to drive change? So these are some of the guiding principles for sort of question development. So things like aligns with system priorities. So as Paul mentioned earlier, sort of the pledges towards inequality, sort of pledges to medication usage as well, just making sure that this is sort of aligning with the priorities of the system and is setting clear goals and measurable outcomes. So having questions that are also clear and actionable, identifying gaps in service provision, measurable, feasible, and also very much relevant as well. So I know that CUH in itself is redefining its research strategy from 2025. So that's probably a really good resource just to look to see where the organisation on itself and what their priorities are. And most importantly, making sure that any sort of research, anything that comes of that is also scalable, sustainable, and also practical. So we do have an example of strong and weak research questions. Here we've got on the left-hand side, can pharmacists improve medication safety as opposed to do pharmacist-led medication interventions during patient discharge reduce hospital readmission rates? A bit of audience engagement. Can anyone tell me which is sort of a strong or a weak research question and also why?
Oh, Paul, you're not included in this one. You've got the hand up.
Ask online. So see if anything comes good.
Anyone else? What do we think? Which one is a good one? And which one seems a bit vague?
The second one. Why do you think that? Yeah?
Yes, is it more smart?
Exactly. Anyone else? Did anyone else have any other ideas?
Do we agree or not with what your colleague mentioned?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly that. So the first one is quite broad. It's
We have another comment.
oh,
The second one has a clear measurable outcome.
exactly, yeah. That's perfect. So that's it. The first one is very broad, it's very vague, there's no context. Where can pharmacists improve medication safety? How is that going to be measured? And then the second one, it provides sort of like actionable, measurable ideas, very clear and defined outcomes, and also a very defined context. It tells us where and it tells us how. So most importantly, when driving change or implementing a research question, we have to look at what are sort of the successes, what are the enablers, and what are the barriers that might hinder that change and how we can actually overcome them. So a successful implementation is just as important as the innovation itself. A great idea in the lab is only valuable if it can be integrated into practice.
So, what's your innovation pathway essentially? And it's kind of start from the beginning to end. How do we have an idea assessment, a brilliant element you want to research and work on, and you've got like formulated your research question, which is like really strong at this point and actionable and measurable. How do we start from the basic research, your idea, that you get feedback from everyone else, and we agree that your research question is like really valuable for the system? To move on to the idea development, to the evaluation, that we mentioned earlier on. So when you're discussing, let's say that you've got a research question and you have agreed that this is what we're going to work on, and it's very good for the system and everything. Make sure during your planning phase, before you go live with that project, you do consider evaluation as well. So the evaluation element is going to be where you're considering what kind of data can we capture to make sure that we showcase the impact we had in the end. What kind of elements do we need to consider to have the outcomes we're hoping to at the end of the project, and what do we need to capture from both elements of like the system engagement, but also for the patient, the benefit of the patient as well. So that's where that comes in. Health economics, if you need to, if you feel that's valuable for the type of research you're doing from that perspective. And regulatory approvals. I guess that comes more into if you're implementing and trying to have more of a structured innovation that you're trying to implement, you need regulatory approvals that has gone through. But if it's just a change in the pathway, just make sure your governance has approved that element as well. Then we move on to the implementation element, and that's where you go live. That's where you've got your planning phase ready, you're ready to go live, you've gone through your governance and everything needed, and that's where you're going out to whatever your idea is, to if you need to procure something, maybe from that perspective, you need to consider, do you need a business case developed to get through your SMTs? What do you need? Are you looking for funding, additional funding to get that implemented? In this case, you would need a business case to support that. And if it's an item or a product, does it have the market readiness and access? If it's something you're trying to implement as a product, is it ready? Is it approved from the MHRA or the different organizations? And are you able to then take that alive and get it up to the patient as well? And then the last bit, which is adoption and spread, we've got the either regional adoption, as mentioned, I like a small one within your system in your department, or a bigger one with a trust or an ICB or region. It really depends. It could go literally national wide if you've got an amazing idea from a perspective that's like really works out. That's where the innovation spread comes down. And then that comes with the post-market surveillance. That's more on the products though, in general. But I'm hoping that this kind of like the life cycle, essentially, of the innovation pathway kind of makes sense. Any questions on that one?
Oh, yeah. How much is understanding that entire, like you've got an entire thing about innovation?
Yeah.
And I suspect that most of us are much more interested in the basic research, we more about validation, value proposition type elements. So how much does understanding, is it valuable? How much should we be looking at those other elements when we're doing our basic research? Doing that, think about value.
It would really good to have that in mind, because the time scales you will need to consider if you have something you want to implement in the real world scenario. This would take time. The reason we were saying earlier on that it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, in a week or in a year, in a couple of weeks' time, is potentially this one. So if you're in the beginning with your idea assessment and idea development, that could take a couple of weeks or months. It really depends on what your idea is in this case. But I find it like really valuable having a full understanding of how your idea, your novel research is going to come out live and going to benefit patients in the end, essentially. So keep in mind, it's not going to happen in a night, right? Essentially, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And it's going to need time and engagement from all of you, essentially, from that perspective. So it's valuable knowing exactly what could come up in the future, but I don't think, guys, you're going to really work on procurement or commercialization, can't even speak, essentially today. Those elements are useful, but you might not be involved in all of them, to be honest. You will have a team that is going to support you. If that's the case, you will have a team with you to support you on that one. You're not alone. This is not an element. The innovation pathway is not something you're going to go through completely on your own. Absolutely not. I've never done that on my own completely, to be honest. I've had like different people and different members supporting different elements in this case, because that's a huge piece of work, essentially. Getting something through all of these different steps is massive. So honestly, you're going to work on a few elements and a few bits, but having a good understanding of the whole pathway, I think is crucial and essential. Just to know who do you need to engage with as well, if you need to, from perspective. What stakeholders do you need to buy in from?
Yeah. I think what Christina also mentioned was really important as well, whereas innovation and implementation doesn't happen in silos. It's a whole culture, it's a whole system. Which brings me on to the next slide, this is a bit of inside information for Norfolk and Waveney. So this is what they use to help develop their own research and innovation strategy, and how at the different levels, whether it's down to individual and external, there's different aspects that help build that innovative culture that can help foster innovations and implementations. So even if you just look at external, working with external innovation agencies to help identify, influence, and apply for innovation funding. And this is particularly relevant to research, especially where you can partner with industry partners that can help develop that research question and also test it in in a lab setting or in a small setting before it's actually piloted and scaled. And then again, meeting with different innovations or solutions, or providing towards a team's needs, reaching out to SMT, getting that stakeholder buy-in, building a psychological safety for for staff to participate on innovation efforts, and even just innovation level or the individual level, even just upskilling and increasing innovation capability through training as well. So these all enable that system, getting that innovation culture ready for any sort of innovation to thrive in. So we did speak a little bit about barriers to implementation and adoption, which is adverse to what we mentioned before. So working in an environment that has that lack of leadership support, where there is no stakeholder buy-in, there is no supportive SMT leaders, or even just cultural barriers, where this can hinder any progress with implementation. And then again, inadequate training and skills, there's no point having any new innovation or any new research put into the environment without being able to adequately use it properly, or an inconsistent vision, again, where Paul has dictated the different policies or the pledges in which direction of a pharmacy department wants to go in. If that was inconsistent, then nothing will really ever thrive. Or it's very important to realize that this implementation is an iterative process, where you don't just deploy it and keep it moving and then forget about it for the next 5 years. It requires evaluation, feedback, and then just redesigning that process and making sure that it is applicable to whatever service provision is needed. Having a short-term focus. I think we find this quite regular, where the initial cost of the innovation can blind any improvement happening, instead of focus on the long-term goal or the long-term outcomes. And again, regulatory and compliance challenges, that red tape that prevents anything from actually really happening. So adversely, we've added the key enablers for successful implementation. So strong leadership and clear vision, engaging stakeholders early, having that support at all levels, including clear communication, resource allocation, have an environment that's readiness for change to build supportive infrastructure, continuous development, and clear outcomes and goals. So this is what has been stated by our own network, which is similar to what we've already shown before, so I won't need to go through it too much, but there's the 7 conditions for successful innovation and adoption.
Yeah, so if you see, essentially, it's explaining the implementation, but think at the beginning, you got a product, let's say think of the pathway you're going to add that product or that idea in. How is it going to change it? How is it going to benefit the system, yourselves, or the patient in the end? So have a think of like where is it going to fit as an innovation? Which part of the pathway is going to add any benefit and impact? On the informed game plan, that's your essentially your project plan. That's your planning phase where you're like considering everything elements we've discussed. That's considering your stakeholders. Like, what's your game plan here essentially? What are the things you need to consider, as we mentioned earlier on, to have that ready as possible? Who do you need to discuss with and engage with to get that support and the game plan development essentially? Your coalitions, essentially. Bring in your stakeholders from the very beginning, discuss that idea with them, have them get feedback from them, essentially. Send those emails to that research email, honestly. Like bombard them with questions, essentially. Or what if your idea seems feasible? Or if not, what can it take? If possible, if you think that's going to show a huge benefit in the end for the system and your patient. Make the demand, not just the supply they're going to have. So you can envisage, if you think that this is going to be benefiting your patients, your system, your department, all the trust in the end, how is it going to benefit a potential future demand? Can you do anything with the numbers? Do you have any available data at the moment that would showcase that demand potential coming up in the future and the benefits of like tackling that challenge today rather than in a year's time? The policy to the problem solving. So all the different elements that Paul mentioned earlier on, like your own department policy, bring that in because that's going to back up your ideas and your implementation element. Like your own trust policy, bring that in. The chief pharmacist policy, bring that in into when you're discussing your project idea or your research questions, essentially. The signal against the noise. You're gonna, as we saw earlier on, you're gonna see a lot around. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the funding. But we can showcase exactly what we're trying to do and why. What is the system benefit? What is the patient benefit in the end? How is it going to benefit anyone at some point? What are we going to, why are we even doing this? Why do we think this is beneficial for something? Why is our research question important to us? Why do we think we need to implement it somehow? Bring that in. Not just a signal that, you know what, this is not a really good idea. If you really think it's a good idea, tell them why. Showcase that. Essentially. And then just stay with implementation. What we mean by that is not just having the idea, but supporting that planning phase, getting your stakeholders in, supporting that implementation, which is going to be a year's project, let's say, in this case. Be with that, monitor, make sure that the progress is well. If you have any risks, identify them, work on them, mitigate, essentially. Is there something that you can tweak or adjust to make sure that we don't have any risk for the patients out there? Can we improve something halfway through? If yes, we can tweak and change our project plan essentially, just to make sure we do have the outcomes we were hoping to in the end. Yeah. So essentially, this is like the last few points of what we have discussed. We'll discuss what's innovation, the pathway, essentially, the guiding principle to develop that research question we talked earlier on, preparing for the implementation, and then the culture, which is essential as well. So these are the few points that we discussed earlier. Next slide, please. So, what innovative ideas or solution could improve your current practice, and how can you help implement these innovative changes? So I'm going to leave you with those two questions. You don't have to answer them obviously today, but get your answers and email them to Paul on that research thing. Because I think that's going to be really helpful as well. Just a bit food for thought, I guess. Any questions?
Any questions?